Welcome, listeners, to Together with Feeding New York State. I'm Ryan Healy.
And I'm Melissa Herring.
And today we're excited to be joined by Krista Hesdorfer, Director of Public Affairs at Hunger Solutions New York. Krista, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So first, can we start by you telling us a little bit about Hunger Solutions New York?
Of course. Hunger Solutions New York is a statewide nonprofit anti-hunger organization, and our work focuses on maximizing the reach and effectiveness of federal food assistance programs. So that includes programs like SNAP and WIC, but also school meals, summer EBT, and the Child and Adult Care Food Program. We work with schools and community organizations across the state to make sure that these programs are reaching as many eligible New Yorkers as possible. We also operate a statewide network of SNAP navigators who provide one-on-one assistance to individuals and families who may be eligible for SNAP. And then in addition to those sort of outreach and technical assistance services, we also advocate at the federal and state level for investments and improvements that can strengthen the programs. So for example, we co-lead the coalition advocating for universal free school meals here in New York.
Excellent. Thanks, Krista, for that background context. And just to set the stage for some of our listeners as well, we are at the point where the governor, the Senate, and Assembly have all released their respective budget proposals for this upcoming fiscal year. So Krista, just to set the stage a little bit, so what is Hunger Solutions' response to the One House budgets, the governor's budget, and what's currently being negotiated in the state legislature?
We are really pleased that both One House budgets and the executive budget included full funding for universal free school meals. Now, of course, we need to make sure that that investment gets across the finish line in final budget negotiations. So we're not resting on our laurels. We're advocating with everything we've got to make sure that New York is the 9th state to implement universal free school meals. We're also really grateful that both the Assembly and Senate included a $2 million legislative add-on for the Nutrition Outreach and Education Program, or NOEP. That is the network of SNAP navigators I mentioned earlier. For the last few years, the legislature has invested this additional $2 million in the NOEP network, which has allowed us to add more SNAP navigators in high-need parts of the state. So we're really optimistic and hopeful that that will, again, end up in the final budget. And of course, we're also so pleased to work with Feeding New York State and other partners to support asks for HIPNAP and Nourish New York, and to see those programs both funded at $75 million each in both of the One Houses. And we really appreciate that the Senate included $50 million toward a state supplement to increase the minimum SNAP benefit to $50 per month. One other issue we're monitoring closely is funding for local WIC agencies in the budget. WIC participation has increased significantly in New York over the last several years, but with essentially flat funding for the local WIC agencies who provide the nutrition education and public health services that folks rely on. So we appreciate that the executive budget and now both One Houses included additional funding to support those local WIC agencies.
Amazing. So thank you, Krista, so much for talking about all these programs, and really want to emphasize that we love working with you and Hunger Solutions New York as well for all of these. And so I specifically want to zero in on the Universal Free School Meals program that you were talking about. Can you tell us a little bit more about the significance of New York providing universal school meals for all kids?
The Universal School Meals has really outsized and wide-ranging benefits for students, families, schools, and even broader communities. School meals are proven to improve test scores and attendance, other indicators of academic performance, but they also support students' mental and physical health. School meals meet really strict nutrition standards, and research shows that kids who eat school meals eat more fruits, vegetables, and whole grains than their peers. This is also a really important policy for addressing the affordability crisis in New York. Families are really struggling right now, and many folks are just above the income cutoffs to participate in programs like SNAP or, in normal circumstances, the free school meal program. So to give listeners some sense, a household of four earning just $58,000 a year would be over income for free school meals in the absence of a universal school meal program. That's a family of four with $58,000 trying to pay for housing, food, healthcare, transportation, all of those basic needs. That family is very likely struggling to make ends meet and they need help. So when we make meals free for all kids, no questions asked, that saves families a significant amount of money. It's an estimated $165 per child per month in food costs. It's really meaningful financial relief for New York families. The other thing I should note is that removing the means test from school meals also removes the stigma. When meals are available at no cost to all students, grabbing a breakfast or a lunch becomes a normal and expected part of the school day for everyone. There's no longer this perception that only low-income kids get school meals. And research backs this piece up too. When schools shift to universal free school meals, more kids eat, including kids who are low income and already qualified for free school meals, but may have hesitated to eat because of that stigma.
That's helpful, Krista, and really appreciate you connecting these various implications regarding stigma, public health, educational attainment, and affordability for New York families. It's really important, I think, for listeners just to understand how universal school meals sits at the intersection of all of these important issues to discuss and address. On the topic of strengthening federal nutrition programs, going to shifting over to SNAP a little bit, what is the role of the Nutrition Outreach and Education Program in its relationship to SNAP participation?
So NOEP, the Nutrition Outreach and Education Program, is our state's network of SNAP navigators. There are more than 80 of these SNAP navigators working in community-based organizations across the state. They conduct outreach throughout their communities to make sure families know about SNAP and how to apply. And they also provide free and confidential pre-screenings, so folks can find out if they may be eligible for SNAP and about how much they might receive. If someone is potentially eligible for SNAP and they want to apply, the SNAP navigator can help them through every step of the application process, including submitting their documents. And NOEP is a really critical service for making sure that eligible low-income New Yorkers can connect with SNAP. That's a process that can be really challenging for folks for a wide range of reasons. Maybe they don't have access to transportation to get to the social services office, or they aren't so tech savvy or don't have internet access, so an online application is not accessible to them. Or maybe they just need to talk to somebody first and make sure that they understand how the program works and what to expect. So these SNAP navigators are based in the communities that they serve. They're a friendly face. They're outside of the social services office, which sometimes makes it a more comfortable first step for folks. And it helps people to overcome these various barriers that can get in the way of connecting with SNAP. Last year alone, NOEP reached more than 163,000 New Yorkers with SNAP information or assistance, and that work resulted in more than 34,000 approved SNAP applications just in that 1 year alone. And all of this comes from a really modest state budget investment. And so ultimately, NOEP ends up returning about a 25-to-1 return on investment for the state. So we're really hopeful and grateful that lawmakers continue to invest in the program, and we urge them to keep that $2 million add-on intact in the final budget.
That's helpful, Krista. And just a quick follow-up on NOEP. So as you mentioned earlier, in recent years, the legislature has and the state have added in an additional $2 million to support the program. If that $2 million is not restored, are there specific communities, counties that would be adversely impacted?
There are. And so the places that we've been able to expand access to SNAP navigators are high-need communities where there are a lot of people who are eligible for SNAP but not participating. Those are often our city centers across the state. But we also use that additional funding to expand services in rural communities where NOEP is especially important because those NOEP coordinators, the SNAP navigators, can meet people where they are in the community. Maybe the most accessible place for somebody in a rural community to get help with a SNAP application is the public library, or maybe they need a home visit. The SNAP navigators in rural communities especially play a really critical role as connectors to the program. So those are the communities that would be especially hard hit if that $2 million add-on were to go away in the state budget.
Absolutely. And just emphasizing across our network, we hear so much the need for these NOEP coordinators and for the valuable work that they do. So really appreciate that work you're leading. So we've talked about NOEP, we've talked about universal school meals and a couple other initiatives that are currently being included throughout the budget process. Are there any other state priorities you're hoping to see in the enacted budget?
One other issue we are monitoring closely is SNAP skimming. So for folks who don't know, skimming is a really appalling form of theft where someone's EBT card information is stolen when they swipe their card to make a payment. That information is then used to steal the remaining SNAP benefits from that person's EBT account. So then the next time the family's in the checkout line at the grocery store, they discover that there's no SNAP benefits left on their card to buy the food that they need. It's devastating. For a brief time, Congress authorized replacement benefits so that when people had their benefits stolen through skimming, they could request replacement of at least some of those benefits. Unfortunately, that authorization at the federal level expired on December 20th of 2024, and Congress failed to extend it. So right now, when people's SNAP benefits are stolen through no fault of their own, there's no recourse for them. So we're continuing to advocate at the federal level because this is a nationwide problem and it needs a nationwide solution. But here in New York, we know that people can't wait for Congress to act. We need two things from the New York State budget to help alleviate this crisis. The first is funding for the state agency, the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, to begin a transition to more secure EBT chip cards that will help protect benefits from theft. And at the same time, theft will continue to happen, even with more secure cards. Those will make a huge difference, but there will still be some cases of stolen benefits, and we need to make sure that New York has a state fund so that there is recourse for folks who have their benefits stolen through no fault of their own.
Thanks, Krista. And just so our listeners are aware, New York is by far the hardest hit state in the nation when it comes to the issue of SNAP skimming. So appreciate you sharing that with our listeners. Natural segue to federal policy. So let's start with budget reconciliation. So Krista, if you don't mind setting the stage for some of our listeners, what is budget reconciliation?
Budget reconciliation is a special process that Congress can use to advance certain fiscal legislation. So budget reconciliation bills are not subject to the filibuster in the Senate. So this is a process that Congress can use to pass a bill if they just have a simple majority, but they don't have the 60 votes that they would need in the Senate to overcome a filibuster and move a bill forward. The budget reconciliation process can be quite confusing to follow, but it's essentially a two-step process. First, Congress passes what's called a budget resolution that provides instructions on how to adjust spending. So in this case, that will be instructions on how much to cut spending. And then the second step of the process is determining exactly how to make those cuts. So to give an example, the House passed a budget resolution last month that includes those instructions for how much to cut. And that bill asked the Agriculture Committee to cut spending by $230 billion over 10 years. And as listeners may know, SNAP is the largest portion of the Agriculture Committee's section of the budget. So now to cut spending by that much, they need to consider a variety of proposals for things like cutting SNAP benefits, restricting eligibility, or shifting some portion of costs to the state. So one thing I do want to note is that just like any other bill, in order to get across the finish line, a budget resolution and a final budget reconciliation package needs to pass in both the House and the Senate. So there are several stages of negotiations where advocates can be weighing in with our representatives and pushing back both on the size of the cuts that are being proposed in that first step of the process and the specific policy changes that are made to reach those cuts in the final bill. So for listeners who maybe don't engage with budget reconciliation every day, I would really encourage you not to get too bogged down in the weeds of the process, but really focus on the fact that this process is sometimes lengthy and there's negotiations at every step. So it's really important for us to keep up the noise and stay in touch with our representatives ongoing to make sure that we're not taking our collective foot off the gas as they make decisions about what's going to happen with these programs.
Thank you, Krista. I really appreciate you flagging that. Absolutely agree for folks to just be using their voices right now, making calls, sending emails, doing whatever you're comfortable with and have the capacity to do for these programs. And so again, you've already started talking about these cuts and what they mean, but just generally, can you explain what the current state of affairs for these programs are? And that includes SNAP, school meals, Medicaid, around budget reconciliation.
So as I mentioned, the House passed a budget resolution last month that provides instructions to each committee on how much they need to cut. So the resolution instructs the Agriculture Committee to cut spending by $230 billion over the next 10 years, as I just mentioned. But it also instructs the Education and the Workforce Committee, where school meal programs reside, to cut their spending by $330 billion over 10 years. And the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over Medicaid, has been instructed to cut $880 billion over 10 years. Those numbers are huge. They would require significant cuts in either eligibility for programs, benefits that are provided, or both. But it's important to note that the numbers are not yet set in stone. Those are the numbers that the House put forward in their resolution, but now we're in the midst of negotiations with the House and the Senate. So it's really important that we all weigh in and bring those numbers down to minimize harm to the programs that we care about. What may happen if these cuts stay at the levels that they're at, we're seeing proposals to cut SNAP benefit amounts by rolling back previous updates to the Thrifty Food Plan, which helps to set SNAP benefits. If that update is rolled back, we're going to see lower SNAP benefit amounts for people both immediately and over time, meaning that more New Yorkers who are already struggling with rising grocery costs will run out of food before the end of the month and not have resources to buy more. We're also hearing proposals to shift a portion of SNAP benefit costs onto the state, which would be completely unprecedented. And most states would not be able to fill the gaps. So we would, again, likely see changes in eligibility, lower benefit amounts, or both in order to make those cuts happen.
That's helpful, Krista. And, obviously thinking about it in terms of a statewide impact, right? You've got roughly 3 million New Yorkers actively participating in SNAP, millions of New York kids receiving free school meals through the Community Eligibility Program, CEP. How would these proposed changes directly impact New York families, as well as these statewide efforts to guarantee universal free school meals or raise the SNAP minimum benefit? What would the impacts be here in New York?
If Congress were to implement a cost share for SNAP, as I mentioned, that would require New York to fill a gap of about $1.8 billion just in the coming year. Our state budget doesn't have that kind of money just lying around. If New York needs to take on that federal responsibility, the state would very likely need to make cuts elsewhere in the budget or restrict eligibility or benefit amounts. So really, this type of cost share for SNAP would have impacts across all of our state budget priorities. Another proposal that would have really devastating impacts on New York pertains to school meals. Congress is considering cutting the community eligibility provision, or CEP. CEP is a federal option that allows high poverty schools to serve meals at no cost, and it's a critical part of a statewide universal school meal policy. However, if Congress were to cut CEP in the way that's being proposed, about 1,800 New York schools would no longer qualify. So the state would need to either step in again and fill a financial gap, or kids would lose access to free school meals. So obviously, all of this is completely unacceptable, and we're doing everything that we can to push back on these proposals so that we don't see any of these impacts in New York State or elsewhere.
Absolutely. Thank you, Krista, for breaking these proposals down for us and really emphasizing what it would mean for New York. And so we've already talked about a little bit for folks weighing in. Really curious, lastly, to just hear what is a call to action for our listeners?
Please contact your members of Congress and, of course, our state senators and urge them to protect SNAP, school meals, and Medicaid from any cuts or harmful changes at the federal level. I've mentioned a couple of proposals that have risen to the top as the most likely to move forward, but we really need to be clear that these programs need to be held harmless, that they're a priority for constituents, they're a priority for low-income New Yorkers, low-income people across the country. It's especially important to share with our elected officials why these programs are so important to you and to your community. Voices of constituents are the most valuable advocacy tool that we have available. We can share data about the impacts in New York. We'll continue to do that. But ultimately, those constituent voices and personal stories are what will change hearts and minds on these programs. At the state level, please also reach out and encourage your state senator and assembly member to advocate for the anti-hunger proposals we've talked about in the final state budget, and to advocate for these programs at the federal level to make sure that the progress that we've made here in New York is protected and we can continue to strengthen these programs and make sure that all New Yorkers have access to the food that they need. We have, in partnership with Feeding New York State, several tools to make this really easy. We've got click-to-action tools, there's call-in scripts circulating, we've got additional social media toolkits on our website. So we'll make sure that there are links for folks available in the description box for any of those resources. But really, even just picking up the phone and calling your representatives to let them know that these programs are important to you, that makes a huge difference.
You heard it here, listeners. And as Krista mentioned too, we'll be providing these call to action links in the description. So please stay engaged on that. And please do anything you can to contact your member of Congress or the state legislature, either pushing back against some of these proposed cuts at the federal level or advocating for some of these really impactful policies and programs at the state level. Krista Hesdorfer, Hunger Solutions New York, thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, listeners, together we can end hunger and poverty here in New York State. Thank you.